Cool. So we're recording now. Jonas, thanks for being here. I'm so glad after a number of conversations, we finally could make this happen.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for being persistent during a busy year. Had a
Oh
lot
man.
going on.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, probably the same for everyone, but especially with cacao. But yeah, and what you were telling me around Christmas period, that being kind of the height of the year in terms of busyness. So did it get affected by anything going on? With everything going on last year, did you find a difference in activity at that period of time, or?
Basically, the last few months of the year are always the busiest, and it was this, it was equally blew us away how busy it is. It's always kind of a full surprise. It's like we can't possibly imagine how busy it's going to get the next year, and it
Mhm.
always blows away our expectations. So,
Yeah.
um, I feel like the whole year though has been that way. Like the shift to e-commerce has been enormous, and it was like Christmas season in March and April when the virus first hit. And everybody was made a run on cacao and began stocking up. We sold more 5-pound bags of cacao than we had ever sold before. We're like, oh my goodness, I guess cacao is an essential good. People are stocking up on this in case they can't get any more. It makes total sense. I would too.
I was definitely one of them. I was blessed enough to have that meditation session with you last summer, and I think that was like my second session with the Onyx group. So yeah, I think it was like second or third one, and it was very heart opening and mind expanding. I've never used cacao in that setting before. I've used it in terms of like a powder that you use in food and stuff, but that's like a teaspoon and not in a ceremonial setting. Injecting the level of gratitude we did in that ceremony, I think that was the key ingredient almost. Like to making it work. So after having that, there was a number of notes that came up for me while I was journaling, and then I sat and listened to a few songs on my favorite playlist, and that kind of, the merging of all those things, the gratitude and the music and the and some of the prayers that we did throughout the ceremony was really unlocked something. I feel like that's deeper than just my conscious mind. And then since that point, I think I fell in love with I fell in love with the product. Now I've tried a few different flavors since then, and I've told a number of people. Like my brother now has it, and then a number of my friends and cousins, etc., who I felt would, resonate with cacao as a medicine and as a tool. So thank you for pursuing that journey and making it available to the world.
Absolutely. I mean, it's my pleasure, but really my honor. It's not a life path that I expected for myself, and it just began resonating with me when I encountered cacao. The synchronicity led me to align my life with more cacao in my life because, like, I mean, it's so good. It has such profound, amazing effects. It just kind of took over my passion and my heart. But I just want to, yeah, reflect what you were speaking to, which is that ceremony and how we started with gratitude. It's what one of the core teachings of cacao that I've come to learn is that working with plants, they resonate on the heart frequency, on the frequency of gratitude. So to really get the maximum benefits of working with cacao, beyond it being a superfood, um, is connecting with it spiritually by preparing our bodies to receive it and resonate at the same frequency, which is gratitude. Because then we can communicate with the cacao, and like at the same level. It's kind of like, you know, if you go to Rome, wear a toga. If drinking cacao, get into a place that you're grateful, and the cacao can absolutely help you get there. It teaches gratitude, but yeah, I've found that time and time again. Sometimes, like, I know cacao is very powerful for helping set intentions and activating prayers in my life. And sometimes I'll make a cup of cacao and I'll find myself just trying to jump straight there. I'll be like, I need help with this, and here's my prayer for the week. I was like, wait a moment, you haven't even given gratitude yet. Like, slow
It's like
down.
you end up treating it like a shot of espresso. You're like, just get this down me and it'll start working.
Exactly. And it's like, and I think that is inherently another teaching of cacao is reciprocity. Like it's not a one-way street. It's not the way that we approach most superfoods in our society, where it's like, okay, I want to feel better, I want to be more healthy, I want energy, like give me, consume, consume, consume. Like that's the ill of our modern society. And it's really, really practicing to slow down and give gratitude first and really receive this magnificent gift from the earth and all the work that's gone into it and the lineages that have tended to the knowledge about cacao for so long.
Just before we move forward, I've completely forgot to ask. Did you have the headphones then? Because I just wonder if you have them, then now would be a good time to plug them in. If not, that's fine.
I don't think I have a pair
Okay,
here.
no, that's fine.
They're somewhere, they're floating somewhere.
Yeah,
I
no,
can
that's fine. That's why I can still hear you. But I just thought if you had them there, then you could just plug it in now before we continue. But that's cool. But in terms of cacao, because the flavors I've tried, for example, like today I had Oxygen spice or Mayan spice, which is one of my favorites actually. But I know there's a number of other cacao blends, I guess, from different parts of the world, like Thriving Tanzania is another one. So where does cacao actually come from? Is there like an original place at the part of the world, and then it's grown elsewhere, or like because it seems like to be from different parts of the world depending on the blend you go for.
Yeah, cacao is there's kind of there's a cacao belt, which you could describe as 20 degrees north or south of the equator, and that's the region in which cacao can grow. But in terms of its origins, this is great. We're actually just working on the segment in a newsletter today. There's archaeological evidence going back 3,900 years ago in Central America, and then 5,300 years ago in the upper Amazon in Ecuador. So that's the genetic birthplace of cacao is in the upper Amazon region. And that's still where you can find kind of the most genetic diversity of the plant. So most likely that's its origin. It spread into Central America, and then with transatlantic trade and such, it was brought to Central America, or sorry, to Africa and Asia. The vast majority of the world's cacao production is now in Africa. It's in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. Mostly what you see there, though, is very industrial, or at least production for industrial chocolate. It's commodity chocolate. That's a rather unfortunate story. So we actually do source one from Tanzania, which is in East Africa, as opposed to West Africa. And it's really been transformative for myself, and I think also for the whole ceremonial cacao movement, to have a cacao from Africa that is being grown respectfully and having a positive impact on the peoples who are working with it.
Do you remember your first ceremony with cacao?
Yeah, it was not intended to be a ceremony, but I actually took so the Oaxacan spice cacao that you mentioned. Before I started making ceremonial cacao, I was making chocolate bars. And at the time that was called the spicy chai chocolate bar. It had a little bit of coconut sugar in it because I wasn't yet at the place where I was palating 100% cacao drinks pure every day. But I took that chocolate bar, melted it into a drink, and went to a redwood forest near my house up here in Sonoma County, and it was just within the redwood forest, was taking sips of the cacao, and the sunlight filtering in through the trees. It just looked so beautiful, and I recognized this moment. I was like, something is affecting my state of mind, my consciousness. Like, this is not my normal state of being. Like, this is so beautiful. What's going on? And I knew I hadn't put magic mushrooms in the cacao or in the drink. I was like, I know that basically the only thing that could be impacting this right now is the cacao, and I didn't know it could do that. Like, this was at a time where you put ceremonial cacao into Google, and there were like a handful of websites built in the 1990s, some people describing cacao in this way, but you couldn't buy ceremonial cacao in the US if you wanted to, really. You had to import it from Guatemala if a friend of yours was traveling down there or something like that. So I didn't have the language that this was a ceremony, that that cacao could do this. I just kind of became fascinated, and my first words to describe the experience were that cacao was igniting awe and wonder in me, just because it returned me to that more connected state, that more present state. And at that point, I would say I kind of became a psychonaut with cacao. I began journaling about every single experience, like taking notes on how I was feeling before the cacao, how I was feeling after the cacao. I just became so curious that chocolate could do this to me, because nobody had ever told me that, and I'm a chocolate lover. So that was kind of the seed ceremony, so to speak.
When was that?
I'm gonna say that was probably sometime 2014.
2014. Okay. And then like, so what was the journey like leading up to that moment in the forest, or amongst the trees, that kind of got you there?
Yeah, I learned about cacao in 2012. I was in Oaxaca, Mexico, and got to experience traditional chocolate making from a Zapotec elder. That was the first time I had at all engaged with the process of how chocolate is made from the bean. Like, I didn't even know chocolate came from cacao beans, or that it was roasted and fermented and all these things. So I got to, participate very hands-on in making my first batch of chocolate. And with very primitive tools, basically an open fire, a clay, a large clay plate, stone grinder, and my hands. And that there was something about that chocolate, though. The energy of it was so alive, the taste was so vibrant, that it prompted me to see if I could somehow recreate that experience back home. And so I began making small batches of chocolate when I got back from my travels. And that was at a time where folks were just beginning to figure out how to make chocolate at home, and start companies doing so. If you look at chocolate in the US until basically, I would say 1990, even 2000, it was all Nestle's, Hershey's, Mars, a very, very consolidated business. And I think Scharfenberger was one of the early ones to break out. But it was kind of a category ripe for innovation, in the same way that craft brewing has taken over the beer market. So in the same way, folks were figuring out how to create chocolate at smaller scales, because they were interested in the social impact that could be had from sourcing cacao in a better way than commodity chocolate was, and because they were interested in the wide range of flavors possible with chocolate. In many ways, it's more like wine, in that there's all these tasting notes, all these different origins, so many expressions of it, and having a few large industrial makers more interested in homogeneity at low cost really didn't honor the plant. So the conditions were ripe, and so people were blogging about home scale chocolate making machines, like, how do you shell 10 pounds of cacao beans, not by hand, but also not by buying a $15,000 machine. So everybody's kind of just sharing plans and such. So that provided me some of the information to start making my own first batches. And then it was 2014 that I decided to just dive in and launch a chocolate company. At that point, it was going to be a healthy chocolate bar company, and 85% dark chocolate bars with coconut sugar. And really the impetus at that point, I was very happy in my other career, in many ways, but I was just getting more excited every time I began making a batch of chocolate. So it was a difficult shift to make, but actually my grandmother passing away was a kind of pushed me over the edge. It was that kind of like, wow, life is short. You got to do what you're passionate about. Why am I waiting around? Like, this chocolate thing, there's clearly something for me here, and I don't have no idea what it is. And at that point, I really didn't know that it would become ceremonial cacao. I hadn't had a cacao ceremony yet or anything like that. So I started this company, and then it really wasn't until 2016, 2017 that I began pivoting it to really focus on 100% cacao, ceremonial cacaos, and e-commerce. and at the time everybody was telling me, like, you can't run a company that only makes 100% cacao. The market isn't big enough. Nobody wants chocolate without sugar. It doesn't taste good. And so we really had to kind of set out and define a category in many ways, by making 100% cacao that is really good, and by innovating with the format of it in drinking chocolate, and kind of looking to what folks in ceremonial cacao were already doing. And so we cross-pollinated a bunch of different movements. There's also the raw chocolate movement, which is folks interested in chocolate for health. There's the bean to bar chocolate movement, which was that whole movement I was describing of folks just making chocolate at home and figuring out how to create more of an ecosystem of chocolate makers. And then, the ceremonial cacao movement. I feel like through my work at Firefly, I brought all of those together. And as a result, we have something totally unique.
Company's not that hasn't been around that long then, Firefly.
No, it's it's really been 6 years. So we're just getting started, but we've basically doubled every single one
I know
of them.
it seems like there's so much activity going on with it, in terms of the amount of people that I see buying it, and then the diverse range of products you have as well. It's pretty crazy to think that it's been 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, for those who thought that the market just wasn't there for it, I guess your heart had some level of knowledge, wisdom, guidance before your conscious brain could logically process it. And that goes, I think that goes from my own experience as well. That goes for a lot of the big decisions you make, like the heart knows of the wisdom and the logic before your conscious brain can actually come up with the reasons as to why it's the right choice to make. So yeah, that's amazing to see, because I've tried the product firsthand, as you know, and I think it's amazing. So that's why I've bought so many £5 bags and and stocked up on it, because it's an amazing tool. But like, what do you see kind of being the next transition? Are you guys working on like more diversity of product ranges, or different product offerings, etc.?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for supporting us with 75-pound bag purchases. It really makes a difference. I think most people who are buying from us don't even, they think we're enormous, and we are reaching a lot more people than we used to, but it's because everybody is saying yes to working with cacao and realizing the impact it's having and sharing it with their communities. Like it's been a rocket ship because of how deeply people are supporting us, and kind of recognizing that this is something different, and that their dollars matter, in terms of creating the kind of businesses and enterprises that support reciprocity and regeneration of our ecosystems and of our trade systems. So in terms of what we're working towards, I mean, I could answer that on two folds. The first I would say is, like, on the big picture, we're working to build a whole new supply chain for chocolate. That's based on it. That's replacing the commodity supply chain model with one that is interested in regenerating ecosystems and providing ethical trade with indigenous communities, and sourcing not from plantations, but really from small farmers that are in this kind of patchwork quilt adjacent to intact rainforest areas as a conservation tool. There's so many ancillary benefits that can be had through cacao sourcing, that there's like I just can't, that has positive impact on carbon sequestration and global warming and on watersheds. It's just like, it is actually a fantastic tool for positive social impact in communities that are in emerging economies that have long been like deliberately neglected. So it's kind of just such a missed opportunity to plug cacao into this commodity extractive system that industrial cacao is. So that's kind of the big picture of what we're working towards, and that is what's really exciting. There is at the volumes that we're reaching now, like the folks in the cacao world are kind of like, oh my goodness, you guys are buying that much cacao from us? Like, ceremonial cacao must be a thing. And we're like, yeah, we know, but everybody's still kind of catching up to like how much of a movement that's becoming and how much cacao we're sourcing and moving. And as a result of that, we're we're working with our partners to like get more organic certification for the cacao farmers that we're already working with and things like that. So it's really rippling back into the supply chain in a very tangible way at the moment. Also, when the pandemic hit, you know, like I said, ceremonial cacao stayed strong. Actually, a lot of chocolate companies struggled, like chocolate bar sales of like chocolate candy. Those sales were impacted, you know, less people buying chocolate bars in airports and such. And so there other buyers were actually failing on their contracts with the cacao farmers. And we were able to really come through and stay steady as a reliable source for those cacao farmers, because the cacao farmers, they're growing their cacao no matter what. So if they don't have buyers, that's a huge problem for them. And so to be able to provide that consistency for them was really amazing this year. In terms of our next steps as a company, we're actually building a new chocolate factory right now, and that is crucial for us to keep up with all the growth we've seen. We've been in the same space for the last 6 years, and if you come over right now, we're just busting at the seams. We're constantly needing to reorganize things just so that we can get us some supplies we have stashed a little bit deeper. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that will just both improve our capacity, but also every time it's actually really interesting coming from a process that's very traditional, that's done by hand, done with stones, done with fire. You'd think that using very simple tools would actually make the best chocolate, but actually every time we reinvest in our equipment and get fancier chocolate making tools, we're actually seeing our product quality increase, both in terms of more consistency, and then more ability to bring out the nuance of the cacao that we work with. And ultimately, yeah, we haven't found any issue with maintaining the energetic, the spiritual energy of cacao when working with it on larger tools. I think it actually improves the quality as well. So I'm looking forward to that jump. And people on the outside might not really notice, you know, we're looking at the subtlest details. Like our job is to sip 5 different cups of cacao and be like, that one, like halfway through, there's this flavor note that comes out. How would you describe that? And do we like that more than this one over here? And so, yeah, we're tasting and sipping cacao all day long and thinking about both its flavor profiles, but also its energy and its impact on us. So it's better tools will help us do that job better. So
Yeah,
that's
the
kind of the
details
big
make all.
dream this year. Yeah.
Yeah, the details make all the difference, though, right? Like you can taste the difference between something like that and the intention and the energy and the effort you put into it compared to something else random that you might buy on Amazon, which I've also done as well. But you taste the difference like tenfold when you're having like the cacao that you guys have sourced and created and then put out into the market for sure. It's much higher grade, um, and I think it's worth the money as well. I think getting it shipped over to the UK probably, I assume it's more expensive than shipping it within the US alone. But I still, even with that cost, I continue to reorder it just because of the actual, first of all, the taste, and then texture and the effect it has on the energy of what I'm doing at that time. Whether it's just me sipping it, I guess, just as a replacement for coffee, because that's what I've done essentially. Like I just found that caffeine really didn't resonate with me anymore. Kind of gave me inflammation compared to at university 5 6 years ago. I used to drink 5 6 cups of coffee a day, and because I was a law student, so I was constantly high on caffeine, whether it's Red Bull or espressos, whatever. But now, as my body's become more sensitive to certain foods and liquids, I have to be very careful with what I put into my body. And I wanted to put something that would nourish it and elevate its spirit and its nutrients. And so that perfect replacement was cacao, using it at the right moments. But then having to be careful not to use it primarily as a stimulant, because you can fall into that trap of using it without good intention, and then it just loses its effect, because the medicine, from my experience of using other plant medicines as well, it's a live energy source, right? Like just as me and you are talking now, there's a spirit inside the body, the same way the plant medicine has a spirit that's live, that's interacting with you. And I say that based on an ayahuasca ceremony that I did, and Bobinsana ceremony, and all these other ceremonies that I've sat in. Their plants are living things, right?
Very, very much so. Yeah. Yeah, that actually, so at least in the US, we, as you might have heard from abroad, we have a pretty big challenge with our land management and all the fires that we've had in California. And it's interesting because in many ways it's an outgrowth of poor land management, of lack of human relationship with the forest and actively tending them in the way that the indigenous Californians knew how to. Like they actually had fires all the time. They just had small fires that weren't, a big deal. And those fires actually helped the ecosystem um, regenerate and thrive. And now we have far less productive forest lands and wildlands, and we have these massive catastrophic fires. And what the indigenous teachers that have learned from about land management practices in California have said that it actually takes far more knowledge to be in relationship, to be deep in relationship with the land than to be like, than to set it aside and say, oh, we're conserving it, we're protecting it from humans. Like to 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 go beyond the like, okay, we need to protect this land from humans, and actually, no, we've done bad things to the land, but we're still going to choose to be in relationship in a healthy way, and we're going to learn how to be in a healthy way. That's a lot more effort, and that's a lot more work. And I bring up that analogy because that's exactly what it feels like we're doing with cacao. Like, yeah, all these nuances in terms of working with it, like every step is an opportunity to dive deeper into relationship with us. And it's kind of this like never ending rabbit hole as we're working with cacao, of just learning about every intricacy and aspect of it. Because when we bring that intention for cacao ceremony into the supply chain and into the chocolate manufacturing process and into the marketing process, then that really can create a lot of beauty by choosing to lean into a relationship that way.
There's yeah, in terms of talking about relationship, I had this kind of realization slowly after what slowly kind of dawned on me after doing an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, and I spoke to the facilitator afterwards, and I said to him, it kind of feels like almost building a relationship with an actual woman in the jungle. But I can't obviously see her. She doesn't have a form, but it's like a formless feminine energy that I'm building a relationship with. And he understood me right away because he's done so many ceremonies, and that was my first time doing it. And I feel like cacao's the same way. The you have to kind of be open to building a relationship and bring the right level of awareness and gratitude to it, to just the way you would with a partner or a friendship or a brother sister, whatever it is, like a human interaction. It's the same, kind of the same way. That's how I started to view it, and I think that takes the relationship to the next level, and you begin working with all of these medicines in a different form entirely, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's on a certain level, it almost takes a willingness to anthropomorphize these plants, and think of them as humans that we can talk to. But I tell people all the time, if you're learning to work with cacao, just think of it like you're talking to somebody. It's like you don't walk right in the door and say, hey, I need help with this, I need help with that. It's like, oh, you say hello and you take your time to share what's going on, and then and you give gratitude, and then maybe you make a request. So it's a relationship. Yeah, and you tend to it every day. It's the most meaningful relationships are the ones that you show up to on a regular basis. So it really builds over time.
Mm.
And one thing I love about cacao is just what a baseline personality cacao has, that's friendly and playful and sensuous. It's a very gentle energy. It's very mothering and kind, and things like that. It can be exuberant. Um, as when I think about the relationship I have with ayahuasca, it's definitely one where I'm like, oh wow, I have to be a lot more, and I have to be very strong in my power. I have to be very clear and direct with that plan. And honestly, I think that's actually one of the teachings of ayahuasca is, even in relationship with such a powerful Amazonian plant medicine that can completely take you out of your conscious awareness. to stay in your power and to co-create and direct and not become a victim of experiences and things like that. So they're very different teachers in that way, but they both fundamentally, it's like when you figure out that you can start talking with them and collaborating with them to co-create your experience, it opens up such a huge range of possibilities.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm curious about, so just going back to the whole supply chain. So I'm curious to get a bit more insight around how you're kind of feeding back into the supply chain and helping people like the farmers, and then also nurturing the land and kind of reinvesting in that space compared to how someone like Nestle or Hershey's, etc., might do it. Because essentially chocolate comes from the same place, but then there must be some sort of divide in terms of, for ceremonial cacao and the way you guys specifically do it at Firefly, it goes in this direction and then they decide to take this direction, right? Like if you could just break that down, that would be quite interesting to hear that kind of process.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say is the scale. Like it comes from the same place and it doesn't, right? Like I haven't sourced a ceremonial cacao from Ghana or the Ivory Coast. I'm not sure that I will be able to find one there in the near future. It's just the whole culture around growing cacao is very different. Um, Most of our cacao does come from Central America and South America, and you know, big difference there is folks who have had at least some connection to a lineage of folks, the Maya people specifically, that have worked with cacao in their lineage for a long time. That's not the case in Africa. And that's actually why I didn't think I would ever find a ceremonial cacao in Africa until this cacao from Tanzania totally surprised us. And that's where I look at ceremonial cacao sourcing as, gosh, like I have a checklist of probably like 4 dozen things that we look for in our sourcing. And it's not that every single one of those has to be present. So say like, 1,000-year-old lineage of working with cacao. Well, that's not present in Africa, but they check so many of the other boxes that I would say some of our Central and South American sources don't check in terms of the integrity of working with the cacao and the details that they're paying attention to and making sure that the cacao is transported safely and properly fermented and kind of post-harvest processed, that I think our Central South American origins can actually learn things from what they're doing in Africa. So that's also what I love about working with different sources, is we can cross-pollinate best practices from place to place. Okay, so aside from that criteria, right now, and I don't think this is going to change at any time in the future, is that we only source from smallholder farmers. We source from farms that are a couple acres maximum, 3 acres maximum. It both spreads out the social impact to a whole village, to a whole community of farmers, rather than aggregating it all in the hands of one individual. Which I think has immeasurable social impact, is working towards a model that's not necessarily around accumulation of wealth in an individual, but more accumulation of wealth in a community, because in these cacao farming communities, everybody shares resources. They all go work on each other's farms to help with the cacao harvest and such. It's just a very different model than the capitalist model that we know. And in some of the places that we source, actually, communal land ownership was something that was still present and operating just a few decades ago. So that's still in the living memory of these communities before that was, outlawed by the governments or turned into private parcels and things like that. So supporting those kinds of communities is a huge priority in our sourcing. And it does take a lot more human power and capital. It's like relatively easy to run a plantation with management, hire a bunch of workers, and funnel all the flow. Like, you don't have to negotiate with 100 different parties and get them to all harvest their cacao at the same time so that you can get a good ferment in a communal facility that benefits everybody, and then manage all the individual payments to all the different farmers based off of how much they brought, and then go back and do quality control checkups with all those farmers and help them improve their planting practices. And it's just a far more complex system. But if we look to nature, like, complex systems are where the resiliency is, and in the long term. um, and so it's actually choosing a more complex system that has far more benefits, and choosing to do that work. So we work with amazing partners in every country that we source from. We currently source from 5 different countries, because it takes like full-time on the ground people to work with communities, to tend with all the relations, to make sure that every cacao harvest is going smoothly and as planned. And so we have, yeah, and the incredible benefit of working with folks on the ground committed to that. And then we, as the buyer, get to really talk with them about our value system and the type of cacao that we're looking for. And I'll always remember the day I was in Oakland, California, and was meeting up with Emily, who is one of our cacao brokers. And she was really excited. She had this bag of cacao beans from Guatemala for me. She had done a lot of work in Guatemala. She had lived down there for many years to really kickstart the cacao economy in Guatemala more. It's Guatemala is one of the places you think of as the seats of the Mayan Empire, of all this history with cacao, but Guatemala actually wasn't exporting a meaningful amount of cacao at all, because of the way that the market there was set up. And so she was doing a lot of work to help these small farming communities export their cacao to buyers in the US who would pay more for their chocolate, and as a result lift up those communities. And she'd been working with 5 or 6 different growing producers and regions. She had just brought on this very, very small region of only like a dozen farmers or so. And she called me up and was like, "Hey, we got to meet. I think I found a ceremonial cacao for you." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing that, this is now that these new sources of ceremonial cacao are coming to us through our trade relationships, because we've had enough conversations that they know what that means." And sure enough, that's become the foundation for our Glowing Guatemala cacao. We buy almost all the cacao from that community, and it's developed into a very, very deep relationship. So she was spot on. Like, I think she integrated everything that we shared, and was actually able to sense the energy of that cacao, because I know the moment that I got those cacao beans, like, I knew that they were special. And that's what you were saying before. Like, when it comes to sourcing cacao, like, it's something that my body and my spirit knows before I intellectually catch up with it. It was, the same with the cacao from Africa. I knew it was ceremonial cacao before I even went to Africa. And kind of had to put all my preconceived notions about ceremonial cacao aside, began working with it, was like, yeah, this is ceremonial cacao. Wow, I got to go to Africa and see what they're doing. And then it expanded my whole definition of ceremonial cacao once I got there. So it's very, very clear that on a spiritual level, on a physical level, on an emotional level, we can sense the cacao. We can sense all that attention to detail that goes into it. Like you were saying, with any food, really, like, we have to be so, the more spiritually sensitive we get, we have to be so careful with what we put into our body, because it really does notice.
It affects the energy field massively, definitely. And it's something that I realized throughout 2020, entering 2020, that I couldn't eat or digest the same foods or liquids, or even the same routine of eating and drinking just wasn't the same, and then you see so much information on social media or magazines or online through websites, or even friends recommending or pushing different products or different meal plans or different X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. And there's so many different marketing plans as to what you should do and you shouldn't do. And it's kind of all based on fear, and it kind of takes you away from your own body, right? And if you're not grounded, you will fall prey to someone else's marketing plan and end up buying or listening to or following advice that may not necessarily be for you. And I think, having gone through that myself for a number of years, it kind of comes from a place of not really being not really trusting your own body's intelligence and letting it show you the way. Like you want to feel like there's some element of control that your conscious mind has as to what's right and what's wrong, and it has to tick these boxes. But actually, if you allow your body to present it the intelligence and you're ready to listen, then I think so many more things can come of it, and you end up just going down your own rabbit hole of discovering who you are, what's right for you and what's not.
I love that you just shared that. Yeah, I think the mistake many people make when they're promoting, some sort of superfood or some sort of diet is thinking that because it worked for them, it applies for everybody. And it's something we think about with cacao a lot, where it's like, yes, cacao has massively transformed our lives, and we can't just market the transformation and be like, look, transformation, you should do this, like, because it's not about the result, it's about the process of getting there, it's about the relationship. And so we actually have to market like connection, and market the way of relating, like teach, like it's really the more I do it, the more I'm like, this is all about teaching. It's more about teaching people how to relate with this plant so that they can take their own journey with it and can take it to places that I haven't been, that like that's actually the ultimate outcome, is for to let cacao be the guide. Like, we offer one example of what's possible with it, or how it's transformed our lives. But since we're all so different, like I love hearing stories from people about how cacao has impacted their lives, because we all come into working with cacao with different ancestry, different traumas, um, different life histories, different things we're dreaming towards and working towards. Like, those all impact the experience we have with cacao. Like, how on earth could I say you're gonna have these results with cacao when all of that is so different from all of that in me? We really can't know.
The
And
context is different, isn't it, for everyone? That's why. So, I mean, the
beautiful.
ground that it's being planted into, I mean, almost like your body's a ground and the beans are being planted into it. When you drink it, it's going to, depending on how fertile the ground is or what it looks like or the type of soil that you have in your body at the time, it's going to flower differently for everyone. For me, you already know the story, which is really helped me with the meditation that we did. But then also I continued using it through my book writing process as a creative tool. It really allowed me to put my most authentic heart space into the work that I was doing, which is what it was for. I didn't want to go into it thinking about what's going to make me look the best or sound the best or look clever. It was more about I want to just allow the wisdom to fall onto the page and not be in the way. How can I be more of a
Mhm.
channel rather than pushing what I think should be the best thing to kind of cultivate a particular image? It was more about, can I just allow my heart to be poured without there being a massive filter? And I think that was crucial, using it for that creative process.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's definitely, like, I would say a trend that I've heard is that it works really well for creativity. I've experienced similar, like, I can't imagine being an entrepreneur without cacao to support the creative process, just because of the way it connects us to our heart. Like, when we're connected to our heart and can more clearly access our passion or whatever it's wanting, that's going to pour through it, rather than filtering it with our mind, and ideally getting to that space where our heart and mind just work in synergy to create something beautiful. That's definitely been a way that I've seen cacao helping people.
Who do you find using cacao the most? Like, is there a particular type of audience, like males, females? Like, what have you seen there?
I would say we see like 3/4 of our customers are female, and I would say that's just because the women are smarter and and more tuned into the benefits of cacao. It's partially because they have to replenish some of the minerals that they lose each month, when they bleed, but I think they're also just a little ahead of the men on realizing what a helpful guide cacao is. So that's actually something that I'm really passionate about, is getting more men drinking cacao, because we need just as much help, if not more so, than women do from our plant allies here. So that's been, I think that's kind of just been like an early demographic artifact. I think that's changing. We're seeing more and more men getting into drinking cacao and realizing its benefits. And, it's oftentimes women introducing their partners to cacao, but doesn't matter the path. We've seen many men become adherents of it. That it does bring up this interesting thing I was going to share earlier, which is something else that we're working on, which I'm tremendously excited about. But you could think of cacao as a feminine energy, right? We've been talking about it being mothering and supportive in these different ways, and generally it's talked about as a feminine spirit. There is another plant that is related to cacao, which carries the masculine spirit, and it's commonly in like traditional forest polyculture systems of the Maya. It was planted with cacao. So the two coexist, and it also produces a seed pod that I would say it looks pretty different from cacao, but it's also in the Theobroma family. And the seeds can be harvested and roasted and ground and used to make something more akin to like a cashew nut milk. But it is a cashew nut milk imbued with the spirit of this plant, which is a very subtle, meditative, masculine presence of the rainforest. And from my understanding, it was frequently combined with cacao in traditional preparations. So part of my thesis is that traditional cacao drinks are actually we're actually meant to be combined, this fusion of the masculine and feminine energies in a cup. Yeah, I'm really excited to see how the ceremonial cacao movement responds to us sharing this plant. We've done a lot of work on the sourcing side. The plant was actually nearing extinction just 2 decades ago because of lack of commercial uses for it and continued habitat degradation. But that has taken a big turn in the last 2 decades after somebody did a PhD research study on it and began actively working with these communities to cultivate the plant again. So I think there's potentially a whole nother upgrade for the ceremonial cacao community in bringing in this masculine essence in combination with our cacao drinks. And it might be that many more men resonate with it at that point because it also brings that aspect in and is very balancing. I think it'll also help a lot of people who regularly consume cacao. And like you said, you can't take it all the time. Like you can't rely on it for energy. It can kind of spin you out if you drink it too much or start developing an unhealthy relationship with it. And the bringing in this nut milk, basically, it really grounds the energy of the cacao and balances it. And I notice my whole system, it still brings expansiveness of the cacao, but it's more balanced. And so that's something else we're working towards that really I think might address some of that disparity in men and women drinking cacao.
So would that be like fused into the chocolate itself, or is it the milk that you'd have to blend with the cacao when you drink it as liquid?
We don't know if this is going to work yet, but we're hoping to make discs from it so that you'll have cacao discs. It'll probably be like 3 discs of cacao to one of these discs, and then you just put it all in the blender together. That's the hope, because then you could use it with any of our blends. But it's similar and different from cacao, and we're like trying to use some of our tools to work with it, and it's like doing totally different things. So we're just like deep in a learning process with how to actually make a viable product that we can offer consistently with it.
When did your first experience with that kind of plant medicine happen for you?
I kind of like heard whispers of it when I was on the ground in Belize in my early years sourcing there. And then I had my first taste of it after I began seeking it out more intentionally, like maybe 3 years ago. At that time, though, it was still impossible to buy it anywhere. Like at most I could get a few pounds from a farm here or there. And then I began, I just kept making a prayer that I really wanted to work with it, and started finding some pretty amazing people. A very, very small movement. But yeah, just got connected with the right people who were carrying a similar vision,
Yeah.
who'd been building the supply chain that I'd been looking for.
Yeah.
And so,
That's
so it all
awesome, man. Well, I wish you
began
all the
coming
best for
together
that.
quickly.
I'm looking forward to trying it. If and when it does come out, that'd be awesome to give that a try and just see kind of how the experience differs or is how it's different in nurturing the energy once it kind of interacts with your own body. But what's your been your experience with like plant medicine in general? Like, have you tried any other plant medicines and kind of at what point was that?
I'm gonna say, let's see, was it? I mean, yes, I have tried. I have tried a lot of different plant medicines at this point. I'm trying to think what the early date was. Um, it was in a similar time frame that I began working with cacao, like sometime maybe between 2010 and 2014. Um, yeah, they're it's interesting because fundamentally they're all teachers and they all point us in a similar direction. Um, which I think cacao is as well. It's one thing I love about cacao is that it's accessible on such a regular basis, and it like teaches us to integrate the plant medicine ceremonies that we can go to and simply integrate that in their day-to-day life and be in gratitude and prayer and intention setting day to day. There's no reason why we can't be. Um, but yeah, and I've sat with a lot of the other plant medicines to learn about cacao as well. That's kind of been an intention I've brought in, being like, hey, I'm gonna bring some cacao into this space, or I'm just gonna have some cacao beans here with me. I want to learn more about this plant and kind of let that deepen my connection and exploration. And so, and it's like with any ceremony, you come with an intention. Sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. So
Yeah, I found that to be the case with ayahuasca. Like, especially going in there thinking I knew what I was doing, going in there with lots of questions and then having none of them answered, you realize actually I'm not really in control. And that's the that's the first lesson right there, is that you're not really in control. You have to kind of open yourself and be okay, kind of allowing yourself to be exposed to the unknown and be taken on a journey rather than trying to dictate the journey, if you will.
yeah, I have to say, like, this is kind of a advanced ceremony tip, but even with cacao, like sometimes I've found myself in resistance to the journey. Like it's wanted to show me something, it's wanted to open me to a certain experience, and I drink the cacao and I have a certain idea of like what's going to happen, or like I'm going to go out on this hike, I'm going to sit on this hilltop and I'm going to meditate, and that's going to be my cacao ceremony. I'm going to look all ceremonial, I'm going to say these gratitude, that stuff. And I just like drank the cacao, and I found myself with a massive headache this one time, and I was like, whoa, like I went through my checklist. I'm like, I'm not dehydrated. I drank plenty of water. I got plenty of sleep last night. Like, wow, that I must be holding on to something. Like something is causing this dissonance in my head. And I kind of began talking to the cacao and began asking like, hey, could you give me some insight into what's going on here? Like, what am I blocking? What am I not trying to experience? And um, that inquiry process, like 5 minutes later, led me to just a profound breakthrough. And I actually cried, and then I danced, and I had this whole deep ceremonial experience, which was like so much better than anything my mind would have allowed me to do. That like you can't orchestrate a breakthrough like that consciously. Um, but it really was, it got to the point where I was holding on so tight, and then really just had to let go and surrender and be like, okay, cacao, I trust you. I'm gonna let go of what this looks like. I'm just gonna like relax and start moving my body the way that it wants to move, and and letting things flow. um, so yeah, I would say, like, even with cacao, like it really doesn't look like the way we think it does sometimes, or that it will. And any given time, like you never know when you're gonna have that next experience with cacao, which shows you something completely new about it, which expands your relationship with it, where something happens that you didn't know could happen. And so I caution people. It's like, yeah, you're drinking this cup of cacao. It's familiar. To still at least allow some possibility for openness. Allow that maybe you're going to want to completely shift your plans for the day if you're able to and free. And the good thing with cacao is it won't overwhelm you if you can't. But if you are able to walk through the door when it offers that doorway, it can be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's almost a metaphor for life as well. Like every day when you wake up, it's you kind of fall into this rigid routine, certain belief systems, certain patterns, certain responses that we have. But it's about having that level of openness that you could expect something or be open to something new happening that day, and not having to control what the day looks like or how productive you are or how much you get done, because it could take you on a, if you allow it, it could take you on a journey that's much more what's the word, magical, or giving you a sense of aliveness that you couldn't have experienced before. And I drastically kind of came into that knowing in second half of 2019 and all of last year, when I kind of thought about surrendering to the process of life as it unfolds, rather than having to control every element of what the journey could look like, and being okay not knowing what the next step is going to be, right? And I think obviously everyone had that kind of awakening last year with what's going on globally, with the pandemic, etc. But like a lot of plans have shifted, and I think cacao's the same way. Like you could drink it and think it's going to go in a certain way, but actually you could, and I've had this a few times, you could feel really tired, and then I think, why, like, why am I just wanted to get all this work done. Like that was the point I had it, that's the reason I had it. Like, why am I tired? Why are you doing this to me? But it's about slowing down and maybe getting into a space of receiving and allowing, just being in general. We become really resistant to just being, because we're in this mindset of wanting to do and be productive and tick off to-do lists and feel like we're progressing. But that's not always progression. Growth doesn't always have to happen when you're making some kind of noise or activity. Growth also happens in silence, right? Like we see with nature, the trees, plants, flowers, etc. All of these things blossom and grow, but they don't have to necessarily make noise, and you don't see them growing, right? Like unless you have a microscope, you see the movements that are happening, but on the outside, not much is happening day to day.
That's right. I love that. Yeah, I love that. I relate to that in terms of creativity. Like I have my best ideas when I'm not trying to have my best ideas. I have my best ideas when I'm like relaxing and having fun and able to like, just let that inspiration come through. I also love that you mentioned magic. Like that to me, like I feel like cacao has connected me to and reinforced that like magic is so alive if we allow it to be. Like the number of miracles I've experienced in the past few years, the uncanny synchronicities and such, like it really just keeps getting better the more I practice that skill set of relaxing and receiving and allowing, and it's a lot of cultural reconditioning. We grow up in a very advanced stage and simultaneously deteriorating stage of a culture that is driving the earth to be a certain way right now, and it's in that place that we have to kind of redefine it for ourselves and figure out how we'll thrive amidst that. And
Yeah, no, for sure. Where did you actually grow up? Was it in the US or?
yeah, I was born in Germany,
Mhm.
and then my family immigrated to Boston when I was 4, and so I grew up there until I was 18, and then moved to California, where I've been since then.
Oh, okay. And then, so you were doing engineering up like the
Mhm.
years preceding Firefly.
Yeah, I had a whole first career in designing solar panels and solar charge controllers for lithium-ion batteries and things like that. It was important, meaningful work, but ultimately, I knew I wanted to be working with plants
Hmm.
and with food systems. And one of my earliest passions that I can remember in life when I was in first grade was rainforests. I remember learning about tropical ecosystems and being totally devastated that we were destroying them, and also destroying the cultures that knew about living in those forest ecosystems. And that, it's kind of charting that passion, like that passion for rainforests ultimately took me to an interest in global climate change. By the time I got to college, and realizing that the rainforests were actually part of this global system, and that if we didn't do something about global climate change, like the rainforests would be impacted regardless. And so that actually led me to energy efficient buildings and then solar. But interestingly, the solar led me not to solar for developed economies like the US, but solar for emerging markets like India and Africa, and providing just electricity for the people who need it most, who still have trouble, who pay $1 to charge their phone, even when they're far poorer than we are. They pay 10 times as much for their electricity coming off of a dirty diesel generator or off of some car batteries somewhere. And so solar actually proved to be an equitable source of energy by providing free electricity with just a small initial cost of a solar system. Um, and you think, oh, a solar system isn't small or cheap, but the products we were designing were the cheapest one was $10, and the most expensive one was $40, and then $100 when we built the larger system. So, and then we were offering financing for those $10 products so that people could get solar into their hands. So you can begin to see how somebody even making just $1 or $2 a day could afford a $10 solar system. To charge their cell phone and have clean light to replace kerosene. So that got me back. That got me working with and understanding the needs of people making very, very little money. I mean, we would go into these communities and survey them about their lives and how they were making their spending decisions and what was important to them. And in many ways, those audiences are quite similar to the cacao farming communities that we work with. And so, yeah, the jump from solar to cacao wasn't that big from a sourcing perspective, and really from like a need finding and getting to know the people in a very different, with kind of a very different set of privilege than what we have. And really, not coming from a place of designing for like us being more advanced designing for them, but really asking them what they needed and designing for them. And in the same way, like that's what we can do with our supply chains
Yeah,
for cacao.
working alongside them, yeah, rather than dictating and telling them and
Yeah,
assuming what they need.
yeah, it's fundamentally actually about respect, and about stepping off of our own high horse, that we've been giving culturally, and really being curious, and asking good questions, and relating just on a human to human level.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that those foundational skills can easily be transferred into, any type of business or venture, like, just the way that you've done. How did the name Firefly come about then?
It's interesting because we're actually going into a rebrand fairly soon. Firefly was for the chocolate bar company, and it's kind of transitioned into still being the name for the ceremonial cacao company, but it was for chocolate bars, and it was to describe that experience of awe and wonder that I first had in the redwood forest, that just had me feeling so connected and so alive. And I was trying to think of how could I possibly describe that experience. And I was like, oh, it's like seeing a field of fireflies, where you see all these little lights in the night sky. Like you don't stop to think about anything else. You're just fully present. It takes you to that place of that childlike awe and wonder. And so that's where the name comes from.
Nice. I love that. No, definitely. It's just about when you see something like that, it's equivalent to maybe seeing a sunset or even thunder. Like it's peaceful if you enjoy it for what it is, and not really judge it. Or even heavy rain, just like listening to rain on the roof is so peaceful in your bedroom. Something as simple as that can be a meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean it's interesting because you mentioned earlier about men, and getting them to or be more interested and open to working with cacao. And I think a part of that is being comfortable exploring and expressing emotions, and to be able to do that, because I guess medicine uh, like that comes from plants, it takes you to a place where it's more intuitive, and you have to feel. And so I find it's important that you have this connection with individuals who you feel safe sharing with, because a lot of guys as well feel kind of um too vulnerable to share, or feel like they're being judged, or have to put on a particular persona, and so they avoid doing that. And that's the kind of stuff that I explore in my book, just of going through my own journey through some of the poetry that I write, is that it's okay taking off your mask and realizing, actually, as you said earlier, connecting on a human to human level, having that level of respect and feeling safe enough to share, being vulnerable enough to share, and being grounded. So I'm just curious how that's been affected in your circle as you started to step into exploring more of those things for yourself. How did you see that affecting some of the other males in your life, whether it's friends or family, or anyone else?
Yeah, well, I'll also add, one of my recipes for being successful in starting a company was to simultaneously commit to another passion that I would want to nurture with like equal dedication, and that way stay in balance with the, just with the inevitable entrepreneurial desire and all the growth and challenge that would be. So I committed to dancing, and fortunately I live an hour from Oakland, which is just a hotbed of a dancing community. And so as I was making chocolate every week, I was also going dancing several times a week. And in that community, I found very, very emotionally connected men, and men who were very good listeners, because a dance is a relationship and you have to listen to your partner. And so in dance, I found a community of men who are already quite in touch. Um, and amidst that, still a microcosm of the greater world. And we were, in this big community of hundreds of people dancing. And of course, there were men who were predatory, and things would happen on the dance floor that we saw and we're like, this is not okay. And the women would come to us and be like, please do something. Like, we can't allow this to happen again. And so the inspiration came up to have a men's circle. Um, and it was a friend and I were like, okay, let's do this. And we're like, well, how do we do this? I'm like, well, I want to serve cacao. Um, so he's like, okay, you serve cacao. I want to wrestle. And I'm like, okay, well, we could wrestle. And I was like super not into wrestling, or kind of actually scared of it, because I was coming from it with the perspective of it being this like dominant oriented, like pin leather guy to the ground. Um, and it evolved into the ceremonial cacao and wrestling container that we would do, which turned out to be really transformational. We would come into the space, and do a silent meditation as we drank cacao. And then we would go straight into wrestling. And we had very specific rules about how to wrestle. It was two guys in the middle, and anybody could just step into the circle. We put down wrestling pads. Everybody else would sit around us and hold space. And then the two men would wrestle, not for the purpose of pinning each other down, but for the purpose of relating, for exploring each other's strength, for connecting, exploring each other's softness. It was kind of almost a mix of dance and wrestling. Um, and in the same way that giving gratitude activates cacao, like the wrestling activated us and our masculinity, and it built our trust with each other more than anything else possibly could. And it was in that space, after we were all exhausted from a couple of rounds of wrestling, like it really does push you to your limit. Within like a few minutes, we would come out of the wrestling ring just like be panting afterwards, and then enjoying watching the next folks as we recovered until we were ready to go in again. um, but after that, we would actually sit and begin talking about relationships, and go to that vulnerable space. um, but it was really the combination of, opening through the cacao and then trust through the wrestling that allowed those conversations to happen. And that circle, even though that circle lasted for a full year before people went different directions, Um, but that circle of men is still some of the most reliable men I know, some of the men I know who I can like just drop in an instant and be like, hey, here's what's going on for me, like I need to talk.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just built off of that vulnerability. So I definitely see, I would say like it's been one of the highlights of my last year is I feel like my life has been transformed by the level of relationship with my brothers that I've been intentionally creating, and also that have been coming to me. um, and I think that's really essential for thriving in relationship with the feminine as well. It's been instrumental. It's been totally crucial for me to have a healthy relationship. Is I think men especially, like, they need role models in each other of what it looks like to be healthy in our masculinity. If we don't have those role models, it's really hard to know how to be.
Yeah, it's a
And
basic question, right? Like I was just thinking about it the other day, and it's come up many years ago as well at different junctures. It's like, what does it mean to be a man? Like something as
yeah,
simple as that is not really taught in school. You just go off of, what do you go off of? Movies, um, advertising, your dad, and not all of those things could be healthy, right? Like it's not always the right answer. So then you go, unless you actively go into a self-discovery phase, or a path of searching for authentic answers as to what it means for you to be a man, you just fall prey to
absolutely.
whatever you're learning along the way, and that may not be healthy.
Yep. Yeah, I would say I've had to learn what it is to be a man from many of the women in my life. And that's, you know, that's a big burden to put on relationships. Um, and if we can actually learn from other men, it just brings a lot more ease there. Um, so yeah, that is it's something I am looking at as well for the evolution of the company, as we mature in our offering of cacao. um, what is the complete ecosystem that we want to offer? And I'm connecting with more and more men's coaches, and also considering men's coaching of my own at some point, that would involve cacao, of course. But considering offering that as part of the experience of connection that comes through um, Firefly and what we offer. We're actually, I'll say this also, we're um, also looking at offering mushrooms, um, not magic mushrooms because that's not legal, but all the other medicinal mushrooms that are so beneficial that, you think of mushrooms, they're like the epitome of reciprocity, of that interconnectedness. If you look at mycelium networks, it's truly amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and because of the work that we've done in sourcing for cacao, we've actually found an ability to do similar amazing sourcing for mushrooms in a way that most of the US mushroom supplement market is actually not sourcing the greatest mushrooms. It's like lab grown mushrooms and myceliated grain mushrooms that are often devoid of many of the medicinal properties that we're actually looking for. Um, so it seems like there's a big opportunity there as well. So it feels like the big picture that is growing is this confluence of cacao, men's work, and mushrooms. Um,
Mm. I actually like the blend, the mushroom blend. I can't forget the name now of cacao. I think that
yep.
was one of the first that I tried, and surprisingly, you can't taste any bitterness in terms of the mushroom side of things. Like it just tastes like chocolate, which is great. And obviously, it's got so many different blends of mushrooms that it's beneficial in terms of a nutritional standpoint as well. So that's been one of my favorite ones, and I was intrigued to try that as one of the first ones because I tried mushrooms when I went to Amsterdam, I think about two years ago, and that was very a very energy expanding experience because you almost come out of, for me anyway, it was like 5 or 6 hours of just coming out of time. Like it was just this intense presence, and it was just like it just, time just didn't exist. I just wasn't in a timeline of any sort. It's very difficult to put into words because it's an ineffable experience. It's not something you can, words are limited, like language is limited by the the words that we make up, but not all experience or feeling can be used in the context of language or explained through the context of language. And so that was my beginning journey of using plant medicine to realize actually there's something else here, some other experiences to be had, which I wasn't privy to before. And then trying that
Mhm.
through the cacao, that was I thought that was an amazing blend. I hadn't seen that before actually with mushrooms and cacao, to see those two. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, that was kind of the first one that really kind of created my commitment to the path of not just pure 100% cacaos, which is what was being offered in the ceremonial cacao space, but also these enhanced cacaos, because cacao is such a great delivery mechanism for different superfoods. And the the way that the flavor profile of the mushrooms actually paired with the cacao to just create this rich, earthy experience it just seemed like a natural combination. Yeah, I actually do think the mushrooms can decrease some of the bitterness that's natural in the cacao. Bitterness not being a bad thing, but it can make it more palatable. So yeah, the mushrooms are continue to be tremendously exciting, and I feel like I'm going down the rabbit hole with mushrooms in the same way that I've been learning about cacao. There's just so much to learn about them. Like I would say mushrooms, whether you consume them as supplements or not, impact our lives every single day. Like the new research that's been coming out on how they impact weather systems, on how they impact food production. Like it's really, really amazing. And we don't really think of mushrooms on having that level of relevance on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's a lot we can learn from them.
Everything's interconnected, but we just don't understand how on a granular level, just because our intellect isn't as developed as it could possibly be, or even not even intellect, but like our spiritual energy, I guess, connection with the rest of nature, because we are part of nature. But I think that the disconnect from seeing everything else as separate, as you were talking about earlier about the land, right? Like protecting humans from it, but like that's just cutting nature in half. It's to realize that there's a symbiotic relationship to be had there, because we are part of that, and that is part of us, just the way that we breathe out, trees breathe in, and then it's a cyclical kind of nature. So to increase our understanding of how things like mushrooms work would then enhance our relationship of how we can develop um that process with the land, and what we can do with it. I guess, the more that we invest in it, the more we realize actually there's so much more that the earth can help us with in terms of product offering or health or well-being.
Absolutely. We are so interconnected. And I think when we societally begin making decisions again that acknowledge that's it's already happening. It's That's what's shifting systems. Like that's what ceremonial cacao is about, is about honoring and acknowledging that connection, specifically with cacao, but that ripples into everything. And that access point can be in so many different plant medicines, and even just in our food. I think we're all kind of collectively working to that similar rebalancing.
What do you think are like the biggest emotions that like either from your own experience or from friends, etc.? Like, what do you think are the biggest emotions for men that they struggle to express or withhold or explore?
um, Anger is a big one. I think anger is very it's looked down upon. It's you're not supposed to express it, or most examples that we have of expressing anger are very, very unhealthy. They're very destructive. They're very dangerous for other people. Um, and yet, like I like to refer to anger as sacred rage. Like it's such it's the fire element. It's hard to live in this world without being angry. Like there's so much injustice that's being done. Like the anger is totally justified. um and and when harnessed in a good way, it's fuel. I mean, it's such fuel when you're angry about something and can channel that into productive, creative energy to make positive change, to shift that thing that you're angry about. It's an amazing force. um so that's definitely a really, really big one. um Grief too. Men aren't supposed to cry, per cultural different definition. Yet Crying is an act of releasing and of letting go. And it's I've come to really look forward. I come to welcome crying because of that space that's there after the crying, which is so beautiful, where you just feel alive, connected, you feel lighter. Um, Something new can take place. So I really see grief as part of this cyclical process that we're all in. And you kind of you have to cry in order to begin a new cycle. Um, and so that in particular is, it's quite the process of surrendering, and of creating space for yourself and feeling comfortable. Like I used to not be able to cry. I used to have trouble crying, period, at all. Then I kind of began getting pretty good at crying on my own, but still could never do it around other people. Like as soon as somebody else walked in, I would just like freeze up. And now to be able to be at a point where I can like cry in the presence of other people has been quite the journey, to allow that and to feel comfortable with that. Um, so those are probably my top two is
Mm-hmm.
anger and grief.
How would you? Is there any particular, I guess, tools or methods that you would suggest to people who may be struggling with expressing those particular emotions to help them get to that comfortable space of just sitting with those emotions and allowing them to surface?
Um, the way I started working with grief was by listening to sad music. Like I made myself a playlist of music that was just sad, and that kind of like it helped me create an external reflection of what I was feeling inside. And that kind of created less of a polarity. It just kind of made it okay for that. My tears were all of a sudden in a space that was there was already sad music playing. So I really kind of had to coax myself into it, kind of creating the container, whether that's you know lighting a lighting a candle and like wearing soft fuzzies, or putting on sad music, or allowing myself, it's like, as soon as I would really create this whole ritual around grief for myself, being like, okay, you want to eat like half of a raw chocolate cake, like go for it. You're feeling sad, like allowing myself to indulge in those things, that removing any expectation for productivity, allowing myself to take a few hours to go into it. It's grief is a non-linear process. I really had to recognize it as such. Um, and also just, yeah, no, not, you know, had to like remove any expectation that it would be done after a certain point, and just also just had to embrace that, like, no, this is like actually a life skill. This grieving process is going to come up over and over again. It's not something that I have to resist. It's actually just going to get easier if I allow it on a more regular basis. So um, I would say I've done a lot more work with grief than anger. I still have a lot more to learn about anger, or my full expression of that. Um, that one's, yeah, definitely more challenging for me.
What do you think?
More something
Yeah.
I'm working with. I would say one of my access points right now is actually this like physical grappling with other men, just like meeting up with a brother and be like, hey, I really need to like push into somebody
Yeah.
and like feel my strength and like
Yeah.
connect to that fire in me a little bit. That's been probably that's my current access point. Um, but I would say I'm still figuring out ways to safely and effectively channel it as often as I need to.
Mhm. Yeah, the music is a big one actually. Creating the right playlist to create a mood within you that kind of gives rise to that emotion and gives it a place to just express itself. And it kind of brings it up naturally. If you have the right music to evoke that particular emotion, it can kind of rise to the surface by itself and release itself. And another one that I found actually is just stretching, like through doing really deep stretches. You just, well, for me anyway, it just certain stretches of the hips or the legs, and obviously that's where maybe trapped emotions have been for me, is like when I get deep into the stretch, you just start shaking or crying it like for no reason. And obviously there's a reason behind it because the body's intelligent, it's trapped it there from certain experiences you've had. But doing stretching really allows that release to happen from a physical standpoint, because trauma gets trapped in the body as well, and so to release it from that aspect, it can really help overall. And I found that to be a tremendous way of kind of loosening the body, because it's emotion is kind of energy in motion, right? And if it gets stuck in certain part of the body, it's because there's tension there. And I found just intuitively doing particular stretches that I feel there's tension in the body, it kind of gives rise to that emotion to just come to the surface. And it's not just like kind of this one and done thing. It's just every time you go repeat it or revisit that area of the body, there may be something deeper and deeper and deeper, and you kind of got to work with it. I don't know if you've experienced that or
Yeah.
tried that. Yeah.
No, actually, yoga has been a huge part of my life,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially moving through grief. So yeah, I'm really glad you articulated that. It's a very psychosomatic expression, and I would say actually dancing too. You know,
Mm,
dancing is just it's like stretching. It's similar to stretching, but it's also just like it's moving energy through your body. It's exploring your range of motion, and as you encounter the limits of your range of motion or range of expression, you hit those points where the energy's stuck,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and that's and then you find yourself dancing in a new way, and it's
Yeah.
really rewarding, you know. But you
Yeah.
might go through a breakdown on that dance floor first too. So
Yeah.
yeah, those two definitely. And the other thing I would say about grief is like if you think of like crying as like the orgasm, like you can't be too focused on the result. Like it's not about the orgasm every time. Like sometimes you just need to be in that like dull grief state, and that's equally a part of the process. it's
Hmm.
it's and it's equally successful grief tending. It's something I actually, when I'm like grieving something significant in my life, like a person dying, I'll put it on my calendar to like regularly enter a grief tending state. And that could look like me crying or not, but it's taking time to think about the things that I'm feeling sad about, to just acknowledge and create a ritual for that process.
Hmm. What have been those kind of milestones where you've had to book in that time to just sit with yourself and acknowledge that feeling? Like what events kind of stirred that emotion in you?
It was, yeah, it was death of people close to me. Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest teacher, and it's, I have so many thoughts on death and living as well. But it's, I don't think our society really knows how to grapple with death in the absence of, some sort of regular acknowledgement of spirituality. Um, I think it's a big part of the harm that we're doing on the earth is that we're scared of death. And so growing up without any, I really feel like I grew up without any sort of teaching on how to relate to death, or what to do when somebody close to you dies. Um, and yeah, my mom died when I was 21, and that just like, it just thrust me into totally uncharted territory, and I was in way over my head. Fortunately, got really good help, but it was quite the journey.
Mm. How and what's your now going through that? Obviously, that must have been a very difficult process, especially if you didn't have any context as to how to handle something like that. And I don't think anyone is really ready for a situation like that to take place. Like, what did that process look like for you? How did you manage to see yourself through
Um, that would be a whole nother podcast,
it?
to be honest. But I mean, I can share with you the starting point. Like my conditioning was, I'm gonna go home and tend to this thing that happened in my family for like about 3 or 4 weeks, and then I'm gonna go
Hmm.
back to senior year in college, and I'll be fine. That was like literally the plan that my mind came up with. And I get back to school and I like go take my first few classes, and I literally physically collapsed. Like my body refused to participate in the productivity and learning oriented world I had created for myself. And I was like, you need to continue grief tending. And I began having nightmares. and I just like really didn't know what to do with myself. And fortunately received actually a friend of mine brought me to counseling, a really good male friend, um, brought me over to counseling. And interestingly, I had had all these preconceived notions about the kind of help I would receive from a counselor, and having had not good experiences with counselors that were brought in because of my parents' divorce growing up. Um, but I mentioned kind of offhand to this counselor that I was having bad dreams. And so our whole first conversation ended up going into this dream analysis, um, that helped me within a few sessions get to the root cause of what those dreams were, what emotions those dreams were trying to get me to process that I was not doing in the day to day. And then I stopped having those nightmares that were really a bad thing, and having a bad impact on me. So that's kind of when I really enrolled, I would say, in the process of counseling, and enrolled in just the possibility of things I thought I had no control over, or that were just random occurrences. Like I didn't really make much of dreams before then, and then I became a very avid dreamer and began journaling about dreams and looking to them for information and things like that. So those are some of the early steps.
Yeah, I think it's always important to take heed of when your body is giving you a message like that. It's kind of getting you to stop in your tracks to process something before you can fully move on. But I'm glad that you found some level of support through that to help you through that experience. I guess just before we wrap up, it'd be good to just get, maybe this is a whole nother podcast, I don't know, but like it'd be good to get your take on death generally. Like how is it you view that when you think about yourself giving up the body, or other people in your life giving up the body, because it's a difficult situation for anyone to imagine for themselves or for anyone else that's in their life. Like what comes to mind when that word is at the forefront of your mind?
Um, I mean, to me, it really comes down to living without regrets. It's like, and really living each day as connected to prayer, to what gives us passion, what gives us joy, what gives us pleasure as we can. It's that very likely requires a significant restructuring and reorienting in your life. It's like, and it can be it can take years, to restructure and reorient around that. I mean, you know, it's kind of intentionally crafting and stewarding your life, knowing that everything's a choice. Like we obviously are born into many layers of privilege and such, and have to act within those limitations. But we also do make many choices, to perpetuate where we are and where we're not. And if anything, the process of like grieving, has shown me that our lives are these like cyclical flows of energy. And if you have a dream and something you want to do, you're going to keep having that dream until you finally do it. And the process of doing it frees up energy for more dreams, for new dreams. It's not that the dreams ever stop. It's that we get to have more dreams if we actually act on them and follow through. And so it's this real process of like full 100% commitment to yourself, and like following through, and not just like being like, oh yeah, I have that dream. Oh yeah, I've had that dream for years. It's like taking responsibility. Like, when are you actually gonna do it? Or is this, or being real, is like, is this not actually a dream that matters to me? But I've found in that process of just like actually committing to actualizing dreams, that it's just the richness of life increases. And then you don't go to bed with like, or you don't encounter death whenever you do with like, oh, I never did this and this and this, which I've been wanting to do my whole life. And rather it's like, oh my goodness, I did this and this and this and this, and it's like, and I still want to do this and this, but it's okay because I did all these other. So that to me is like that living without regret. I've been learning a huge amount about how to, I've been a very productive and oriented person my whole life, like just from the schooling I've received and the career paths I've chosen. And lately I've been learning a huge amount about just allowing more pleasure and spaciousness in my life, and shifting out of that productive go and just really receiving. I've been having more fun. I really have been having more fun than I've probably known um, I could have, and it's been really interesting weaving that in with staying committed to the responsibilities that I have as well, and finding a very, very good balance there.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's important to explore the space for play and allowing yourself to just be, and not tying everything to a particular outcome. And I think that's something I've had to explore over the last year. Is one of my mentors said, experiment without expectation, and really just stepping into play. Like as children we did that, and then somewhere along the line we start to think every action has to be tied to an outcome, and you get into this productive mindset, which I know I did for a long time. And really most of your ideas and creativity just flows when you're slowing down and in receiving mode. You can't be pushing all the time and trying to give to work or to any particular outcome that you're trying to achieve, but then to step back, make the intention, and then step back to receive the guidance or the wisdom or the creativity to allow for that expansion. And then when you feel like you've got enough of it, then take action on it, and then that frees up more room for expansion, as you said. And I feel that that's going to be kind of the space that I get into once I finally publish the collection of writing that I've got. Then it's going to create some space for whatever comes next. I don't know what that will be, but whatever form of service my heart gets called to, is just a matter of then coming out of this masculine productive mindset of me trying to get through everything to the publishing stage, and then stepping back and thinking, okay, what do I need to do next? And I'm open to receiving that and slowing down to listen to those messages. So I think
Yeah.
generally with what's going on in the world right now, it's forced everyone to slow down anyway and just reflect on their lives, just because of the series of events that have taken place. So
Mhm. It's such an expansion and contraction, it's like you move through like very focused, and then like you're like, okay, now what's next? And
mm,
focus and on next. And I think one of the biggest things I've also been learning is the practice of non-resistance. Like whenever I'm resisting what's happening, or like unhappy about it, or trying to like steer it too tightly into and oftentimes it's in ways that make me comfortable, in ways that protect my trauma or things like that. When I'm that's an enormous expenditure of energy. And so if I really it takes a lot of tending to my inner voices and looking at them critically and being like, why am I resisting this? Like, what about it don't I like? What about it makes me uncomfortable? Like, what's the story that I'm operating off of here that's actually limiting me? And
mm,
it's using a huge amount of my time and energy to like try and keep things a certain way. When I stop doing that, it just it allows things to flow so much more easily. And I can it and that to me is that's the key to receiving. It's like when I stop resisting what's actually happening, and allow it to flow, and then do the healing work and the grieving and the anger and all the things it brings up. Um, but then the life is flowing as
mm,
well.
yeah.
And it takes a deep level of trust that will be taken care of. Like it's a bit of that surrender of I have to take care of myself all the time. And like, now actually I have all these allies to support me. Like I have cacao, I have other plant medicines, I have a men's circle. Like there's this whole thing that's holding me. And in that space, I can really plunge into like, oh, I'm scared of this. Okay, I can be scared of it, and I can sit and tend with that rather than trying to prevent the circumstances that are bringing up that fear. I've
Hmm.
seen that mirrored in relationship a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
You know?
definitely. Well, this has been a really nourishing conversation. I'm glad that we actually found a time to do it. So
Yeah.
I appreciate, honestly appreciate you sharing all the wisdom, knowledge, information and emotion and intention that you've put into this conversation. I know there's probably so much more we can unpack. As you said, some of the topics are probably best for another podcast, but for now, I love and support everything that you do, and I'm super appreciative of the courage that you have to show up as yourself and to explore some of the areas that may be uncharted for many people, because the world needs people who may lead the way and be courageous so that they can step into their own courage and not feel so lonely. So thank you for all that you're doing in the world right now, man.
Thank you, and I'm really so grateful for this conversation and the sense of brotherhood. I feel like you articulate so many things so beautifully, and just the flow of this conversation was really nourishing. And yeah, I sense your path and journey as well that feels kindred. Um, so thanks for just this opportunity to connect and explore the full range of it. It's just
100%.
such, life is so dynamic.
It is.
And
It is 100%, man. And where so if people want to find you and support you and learn more about your journey, what's the best place for them to do that?
um, ceremonial-cacao.com is our website. Cacao Ceremonies, our Instagram handle. That's probably the best place to start. I'm Jonas Ketterle on Facebook. You can find me as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap this up, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon, and hopefully record another one later
Yeah,
down the line, man.
yeah. Thank you. Blessings. Um, yeah, I'm still looking forward to reading your book. I haven't gotten the chance to dive in yet.
I'm glad
It's
you
been
haven't, because again, a few more things have changed, and I'd rather what I do is
okay.
give me yeah. Let's don't dive into that. Actually, there's black and white photography that I've injected into some of the writing to really bring out the messages, and I think you really enjoy it. So I want to I want to send that to you as a gift, actually. So let's speak about it after this episode, and I'll send you a copy, man. But yeah, thanks again,
Okay,
and I'll
sounds
speak to you
great.
soon.
Okay.